To pick, to my understanding, two professional growth goals to focus on during our induction. And I want to talk about the first one first because it was something that I realized towards the middle of the school year. And so I ended up choosing this question from the list because I found it very relevant. And I found that it was, if I didn't do something about solving this problem, that my health and well being was going to continue to go downhill. So this question is, how can I integrate high impact teaching strategies into my daily practice while maintaining a non negotiable end of the day boundary for my personal life? So, the reason why I chose that one is because I started to get really stressed out, especially the first quarter when I was teaching, let's say, about seven different curriculums, I believe. Um, and Saturday would go to grading, Sunday would go to lesson planning, and then after talking to some veteran teachers and my coach, I realized that I was doing too much. I was grading everything. I was designing all my lessons from scratch, which I still do, but not every lesson. And that's kind of the point of me answering this question. I was able to find strategies that I could use in the class, that I could teach in the class, that in which would kind of take a load off of my shoulders. For example, the students would learn at the same time. It's a teaching strategy, but they can assess their own work or assess the work of their peers. And that takes a little bit of the load off the grading for me. Also, I quit grading everything and just use some of the work for practice, for kind of measuring assessments, for giving impromptu feedback in class. So not everything has to be graded, but it doesn't mean that you can't use it. You can still use it very effectively in your teaching. The second part was I was designing all my lessons from scratch, but after talking to my coach and different teachers, I was also able to find resources in which I could find lessons that were already made. Because I'm very picky and very particular, um, and I like to use my own ideas in learning, I you can get some of those lessons and sometimes you can adjust them, you can change them to meet the needs of your classroom and of your teaching objective. So that is that. I started to be able to spend time with my kids again, and I started to have a life again. So that is one clear rule that I learned in my first year of teaching, is to have that boundary set with yourself and to learn strategies for time management and more efficient grading. The second question is, how do I expand my professional knowledge through becoming a lifelong learner to continuously upgrade my skills through changing times? I'm very passionate about this one, and it's actually a question that I designed on my own. We were given the option to design our own professional growth goal question, and that is the one that I designed. And the reason why I designed that question is, I want to explain something first. As new teachers, we're constantly learning. We're constantly being told to learn from other teachers and from our students and from our schools and from admin, which we do. And it's the only way that we can learn, right? But I feel that we can also observe and not have to agree with everything that we see. So, for example, I have seen and worked with teachers over the last few years in my teacher credential journey. And sometimes teachers don't seem to update on their teaching strategies to fit the ever changing demographics of students and learners. For example, I've seen teachers use the same techniques that were used when I was in school. The thing is, let me use, for example, how when I was a student in school, authoritarian ways of discipline were used, and they were effective. We were a different generation. But now, the new generation of learners, that's not very effective with them. They don't respond well to it. In fact, I've seen that most of the time they resent it and they end up not respecting the teacher that is using the authoritarian ways of discipline. This new generation responds more to mutual respect, transparency, and they don't respond well to obedience or to hierarchy. Um, and I do feel like that's a strength of mine, that I am able to adjust my own personal views, my own personal ways of doing things to meet the needs of the new generation. Another aspect that I find really relating to this and very concerning and very important is the way that we use technology. So, for example, I feel like there's different modes of technology. If we're using a low mode of technology, it's not as effective as when we use a high level mode of technology. For example, I can give my students, which I do all the time, I give them a digital worksheet on Google Classroom. There you go. You're using technology. I'm setting you up for the future. Not really. So this is kind of also a question of equity, because more high performing schools are using more high levels of technology in their learning. For example, they use Padlet. They have systems and programs in which students can actually create. They can actually create through technology. Um, and I feel like, most schools were just not there yet. So I am very proud to say that I'm so ready, because I am not a very technological person. When I went to school, we were just basically using like PowerPoint and Word, and that was about it. And we didn't grow up with social media or with high technology use. But I know that I have to be open. I have to be open-minded. I have to be ready to learn, to integrate the needs of the ever-changing new generations. So even though sometimes it scares me to learn new forms and new modes of technology, I do understand that it's for the benefit of my students, for me to use those modes into their learning. So I wouldn't say that Padlet is like all the way on the top of the technology mode, but it's enough to where it does use the hierarchy of the learning to where they're able to learn to apply high order thinking skills. For example, I design an essential question, or even they can design their own essential question. And we use Padlet to blog in class. They blog in a live form in which they all can see each other's writing. And they have that sense of urgency where they have to get their critical thinking skills going. And there's also a sense of performance in there, because they know that everybody's watching them write their response as they're writing it on the screen. There's a sense of creation because they're getting published, so to speak. So there's many elements of learning and brain activation and hierarchy learning that's going into this form of technology in the learning, as opposed to just using a worksheet, which doesn't really get them necessarily to use their high order thinking skills. So my point is that we need to use technology to motivate our students to get their higher order learning skills going, and to also meet the needs of the new generation. And we have to be open as teachers to learn all this stuff, to learn the new ways of discipline, to learn the new ways of the new generation, and how they learn, how they communicate, how they feel. Because it's not about us anymore, right? It's about them. So those are the two questions that I chose, and I apologize for talking your ear off, but I hope that we all continue to learn from each other.